They told me, "You'll block the photos," as if I was a shadow looming over their perfect day. The whisper sliced through the bustling reception, right when I thought I had a moment to breathe. My own sister's words felt like ice water poured over my heart. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I'm 72 years old, and every morning in my cramped one-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens, I wake to the sound of the subway rumbling beneath my floorboards. The walls are thin here, paper thin, and I can hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door making her café con leche. The smell of fresh bagels drifts up from Goldstein's Deli on the corner, mixing with car exhaust and the distant aroma of someone's weekend pancakes. My routine has become as predictable as the sunrise over the Manhattan skyline. I make my instant coffee, check the mailbox for bills I can barely afford, and stare out my window at the endless stream of people who seem to have somewhere important to go. That October morning was different, though. It was my sister Patricia's wedding day, her third marriage if we're keeping count. But who am I to judge? At 68, she deserved happiness, and I genuinely wanted to celebrate with her. I had spent weeks preparing for this day, saving every penny from my Social Security check to buy a decent dress from Macy's. Navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, nothing fancy, but it made me feel presentable. I even splurged on getting my gray hair styled at the salon down on Northern Boulevard, where Mrs. Kim has been cutting hair for 30 years. The wedding was at St. Margaret's Catholic Church in Middle Village, a beautiful old stone building where our mother had taken us for Mass every Sunday when we were children. I arrived early because I've always been the punctual one, the responsible one, the one who shows up when she says she will. The morning air was crisp with that particular October chill that makes your breath visible, and the maple trees lining the church parking lot were ablaze with red and gold leaves. It should have been perfect. I remember standing outside the church for a moment looking at the carved stone angels above the entrance, the same angels I had stared at during countless childhood services. My mind drifted to the old photographs I keep in a shoebox under my bed, faded Polaroids of Patricia and me as little girls, our hair in pigtails, wearing matching Easter dresses that our mother had sewn by hand. We were inseparable then, sharing secrets and dreams, building blanket forts in our tiny Brooklyn apartment. Those were the days when love felt simple and unconditional. The church smelled of fresh flowers and industrial-strength cleaning products, with that faint undertone of incense that never quite leaves old Catholic buildings. White roses and baby's breath adorned every pew end, and someone had strung tiny white lights along the altar rail. It was beautiful, truly beautiful. I found a seat in the third row, close enough to see everything but not so close as to draw attention to myself. That's where I always position myself in life, close enough to help, far enough away to be ignored when convenient. As the church filled with guests, I recognized faces from decades past. Cousin Marie from Bay Ridge, Uncle Frank with his new hip and his same old complaints about the Mets, Patricia's children from her first marriage, my nephew David, now 45 and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent, and my niece Jennifer, 38 and glowing with that particular radiance of someone whose biggest worry is whether her manicure will chip during the reception. They nodded at me with polite smiles, the kind you give to distant relatives whose names you're not quite sure you remember correctly. But sitting in that pew, watching the pre-ceremony bustle, something felt off. The conversations around me seemed muffled, conspiratorial. Jennifer whispered something to David, and they both glanced in my direction with expressions I couldn't quite read. Pity? Annoyance? I adjusted my dress and tried to focus on the beautiful stained glass windows, the way the morning light painted rainbow patterns on the old wooden floor. The ceremony itself was lovely. Patricia looked radiant in her cream-colored dress, not white, as she laughingly told people, because that ship sailed decades ago. Her new husband, Robert, seemed kind enough, a retired postal worker from Flushing with gentle eyes and a patient smile. I cried during their vows, partly from joy but mostly from loneliness, watching two people promise to care for each other through sickness and health, for better or worse, till death do them part. Promises I had once made myself, 40 years ago, to a man who left me childless and divorced before my 40th birthday. After the ceremony, as we all moved to the parish hall for the reception, that's when it happened. I was standing near the head table, smoothing down my dress and trying to figure out where I was supposed to sit, when I heard Patricia's voice behind me, clear as a bell, sharp as broken glass. "Margaret, you'll block the photos if you stand there." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not, "Could you move a little to the left, please?" Or, "Let's make sure everyone can see." Just a flat statement delivered in front of 36 wedding guests, that I was an obstruction to be moved aside, a shadow looming over their perfect day. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The conversations around me seemed to pause, 60 years of conditioning kicking in as I automatically stepped backward, mumbling apologies, trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less burdensome. I found myself backing toward the hallway that led to the church kitchen, away from the laughter and clinking glasses, away from the joy that apparently didn't include space for me. That's when I noticed the weight of my purse on my shoulder. Inside was my checkbook, the same checkbook I had carried to every family crisis for the past 15 years. The checkbook that had funded Patricia's divorce attorney fees from marriage number 2. The checkbook that had paid for Jennifer's college textbooks and David's down payment on his first car. The checkbook that had covered our mother's final hospital bills when Medicare fell short. The checkbook that had somehow become my only currency in the economy of family love. Standing alone in that hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration beyond the closed doors, I finally understood something that had been building inside me for years. I wasn't family. I was a bank. A convenient, reliable, always available bank that happened to share their DNA. Let me tell you about the years that led to that moment, because this story didn't begin with a wedding. It began 15 years earlier, in a different hospital hallway under different fluorescent lights, with different tears on my face. Our mother, Rose Callahan, spent her final 2 months at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan, pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless, though she fought it with the same Irish stubbornness that had carried her through raising 2 daughters as a single mother in 1960s Brooklyn. I was 57 then, working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Long Island City, making just enough to cover my rent and groceries with a little left over for the occasional movie or dinner out. But when Mom got sick, my modest savings evaporated like water on hot concrete. Patricia was going through her second divorce at the time, stressed and overwhelmed with lawyer fees and custody battles. David was just starting his family, struggling with a new mortgage and a baby on the way. Jennifer was finishing graduate school, drowning in student loans. So naturally, it fell to me, unmarried, childless, supposedly free of major financial obligations, to handle the medical bills that Medicare didn't cover. I remember sitting beside Mom's hospital bed at 3 in the morning, holding her hand as morphine drip made her drift in and out of consciousness. The room smelled like disinfectant and despair, and the machines beeped their electronic lullabies while traffic hummed 20 floors below on Fifth Avenue. During those quiet hours, Mom would sometimes wake up and squeeze my hand, whispering, "Thank you, Maggie," in her weakened voice. What would we do without you? What would they do without me? That question became the soundtrack of my life. After Mom died, the family seemed to naturally assume that I would continue in my role as the family bank. Patricia's divorce left her short on cash for deposits and legal fees. David's construction business hit a rough patch during the 2008 recession. Jennifer decided to switch career paths and needed money for a coding boot camp. And somehow my phone was always the first one they called. "Maggie, I know you don't like to talk about money, but could you help us out just this once?" Patricia's voice would plead through my flip phone. Yes, I still had a flip phone, because smartphones felt like an unnecessary luxury when I was sending $300 here, $500 there, $1,000 for this emergency or that crisis. Just this once became just until the insurance check comes through, which became just until David gets that big contract, which became just until Jennifer finds a better job. The promises to pay me back grew vaguer with each request, and eventually, they stopped mentioning repayment altogether. It became understood that this was simply what I did for family. This was my role, my purpose, my contribution to keeping us all afloat. I kept track, of course. In a small notebook with a faded blue cover, I wrote down every check, every transfer, every cash advance. The amount started small but grew steadily larger as everyone's problems seemed to escalate. David's business difficulties required an investment of $8,000 that I borrowed against my 401k. Patricia's third wedding, the one where I would eventually be told I was blocking photos, cost me $4,000 in contributions to the venue, catering, and her dress. Jennifer's apartment deposit, her car repairs, her root canal surgery, $2,000 here, $1,500 there. By the time I was sitting in that church hallway, the notebook showed a total of over $43,000 that had flowed from my accounts into theirs over the years. $43,000 that represented every vacation I didn't take, every restaurant meal I skipped, every time I bought generic groceries and wore the same winter coat for 5 straight years. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way my presence in their lives had become purely transactional. Phone calls that started with, "How are you?" but quickly moved to, "We have a situation." Holiday invitations that came with suggestions about what I could contribute to the meal or the gift exchange. Birthday cards that arrived days late with hastily scrawled messages and no return address, while elaborate celebrations were planned for everyone else in the family. I remember one particularly painful Christmas 3 years before the wedding. Patricia had invited the family to her house in Bayside for Christmas dinner, and I had offered to bring the ham and pay for the wine. I spent 2 days preparing side dishes, using Mom's old recipes for sweet potato casserole and green bean almondine, trying to recreate the warm holiday memories from our childhood. When I arrived at Patricia's house carrying bags of food and bottles of wine, Jennifer opened the door with a harried expression. "Oh, Aunt Maggie, perfect timing. We're running behind on everything. Could you help in the kitchen?" And for the next 4 hours, I chopped, stirred, served, and cleaned, while the rest of the family watched football and caught up on each other's lives. During dinner, seated at the far end of the table near the kitchen door, "So you can jump up if we need anything," Patricia had explained with a smile. I listened to animated conversations about David's promotion, Jennifer's new boyfriend, Patricia's latest cruise plans. When someone occasionally remembered to include me, the questions were always practical. "Maggie, did you remember to put the butter out?" Or, "Could you grab some more ice from the freezer?" Never. "How was your year, Maggie?" Or, "What have you been reading lately?" Or, "Tell us about that art class you mentioned." I had become the family's unpaid catering staff, reliable and invisible. That Christmas dinner ended with me washing dishes alone in Patricia's kitchen, while everyone else moved to the living room for gift exchange. Through the doorway, I could see them laughing and taking pictures, David's children squealing with delight over new toys, Patricia showing off jewelry that Robert had given her. No one seemed to notice that I was missing from the family photos, or if they did, they didn't consider it worth mentioning. But the most painful moment came later, as I was drying the last of the wine glasses. Jennifer wandered into the kitchen, probably looking for more wine, and found me staring out the window at Patricia's backyard, where a few stubborn roses still bloomed despite the December cold. "You know, Aunt Maggie," she said, her voice slightly slurred from holiday cocktails, "you're so lucky. You don't have all the stress the rest of us have. No kids, no mortgage, no real responsibilities. Must be nice to be so free." Free. That word echoed in my head for weeks afterward. Free to work overtime to fund everyone else's dreams. Free to spend my holidays cooking and cleaning for people who saw me as hired help rather than family. Free to go home alone to my empty apartment, where no stockings hung by the radiator and no excited children woke me up on Christmas morning. The truth was, I had never felt less free in my life. I was trapped in a role that had somehow become my entire identity. The family ATM, the reliable safety net, the spinster aunt who existed to make everyone else's life easier. And the most devastating part was that I had participated in creating this dynamic. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every check I wrote to solve someone else's problem, every hour I spent serving others while neglecting my own needs, I had reinforced their belief that this was simply who I was. The microaggressions accumulated like dust on furniture, so gradually that you don't notice until suddenly everything looks grimy and neglected. Patricia would call to complain about her financial stress while describing expensive restaurant meals and weekend shopping trips. David would mention being cash poor while posting Facebook photos from his family vacation in Florida. Jennifer would talk about being broke while carrying a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My birthday, February 14th, which should have been easy to remember, passed unacknowledged for 3 years in a row. Valentine's Day cards filled every store display, but my mailbox remained empty except for bills and advertisements. When I mentioned this to Patricia, she laughed and said, "Oh, Maggie, you know how crazy our schedules are. Besides, you're not really the birthday party type, are you?" Not the birthday party type. As if wanting acknowledgement of my existence was some quirky personality trait rather than a basic human need. The breaking point came 6 months before Patricia's wedding when I got pneumonia. What started as a persistent cough in January had progressed to full-blown illness by March. I was running a fever of 102 degrees, could barely get out of bed, and had no energy to walk the 3 blocks to the corner store for soup or medicine. I called Patricia first, figuring that if anyone would help, it would be my sister. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, and I could hear music and conversation in the background. "Maggie, what's wrong? I'm kind of in the middle of something here. I'm really sick," I managed to whisper, my throat raw and my voice barely audible. "I think I need to go to the emergency room, but I don't think I can drive myself." There was a pause, and then Patricia's voice came back, slightly muffled, as if she had covered the phone with her hand. I could hear her talking to someone else, though I couldn't make out the words. "Listen, Maggie, I wish I could help, but we're at Robert's son's engagement party. It's really important to his family that we're here. Can't you call an ambulance or something? Or maybe try David. He might be free." An ambulance. for someone to drive me 10 minutes to the hospital, as if I were a stranger rather than the sister who had helped pay for her wedding dress. I called David next, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Jennifer's number was disconnected. She had gotten a new phone and apparently forgotten to give me the number. I sat on the edge of my bed, shivering with fever and feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Finally, I called Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor who barely spoke English, but who had always smiled and waved when we passed in the hallway. In broken English mixed with Spanish, she managed to understand that I was sick and offered to drive me to the hospital in her ancient Honda Civic. This woman, who I had only exchanged pleasantries with for the past 5 years, showed me more care and concern than my own family. The emergency room doctor diagnosed bacterial pneumonia and prescribed antibiotics, rest, and plenty of fluids. Mrs. Rodriguez waited with me for 3 hours, holding my purse and occasionally patting my hand, while we sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under harsh fluorescent lights. She didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak much Spanish, but we communicated perfectly in the universal language of human compassion. When I got home, my phone had 2 missed calls from debt collectors and a text message from Patricia. Hope you're feeling better. By the way, Robert's car needs some work and we're a bit short this month. Could you help out? Maybe $800? Thanks. I stared at that text message for a long time, sitting on my couch with a cup of lukewarm tea and a blanket that Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted on lending me. Patricia hadn't asked about my emergency room visit, hadn't inquired about my diagnosis, hadn't offered to bring me soup or medicine or even just check on me. But she had found time to ask for $800 while I was literally fighting pneumonia. That was when I started to see the pattern clearly for the first time. I wasn't a sister, an aunt, a family member. I was a resource to be managed and exploited. And I had been so desperate to maintain my connections to the only family I had that I had allowed myself to become nothing more than a walking wallet. The realization should have been empowering, but instead it filled me with a grief so deep that it felt like another illness. I grieved for the family relationships I thought I had, for the love I believed I was earning with every check I wrote, for the woman I had been before I started measuring my worth in dollars and cents. But even with this new awareness, I still wasn't ready to change anything. The fear of being completely alone terrified me more than being financially and emotionally exploited. What if I said no, and they stopped calling altogether? What if I set boundaries and discovered that without my money, I truly had no place in their lives? The phantom pain of imagined loss felt worse than the real pain of continued abuse. So I kept writing checks. I kept answering their calls. I kept showing up when summoned and staying quiet when ignored. I told myself that this was just how families worked, that everyone had roles to play, that my contribution was valuable even if it wasn't recognized or appreciated. But somewhere deep inside, a small flame of anger had been lit. Not a blazing fire yet, just a tiny flicker of rage that grew a little brighter each time I was treated as an afterthought, each time my generosity was taken for granted, each time I realized that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. That flame kept me warm during the long nights when I would lie awake doing mental arithmetic, calculating how much money I had given away, how much I could have saved, what kind of life I might have lived if I had invested in myself instead of everyone else's dreams. It kept me company when I ate microwave dinners alone while looking at Facebook photos of family gatherings I hadn't been invited to. It flickered hopefully when I imagined what it might feel like to say no, to keep my money in my own account, to demand the respect that I had never required. But it was just a flame, not yet a fire. And flames can be easily extinguished by fear, by guilt, by the desperate need to belong somewhere, to matter to someone, to be needed even if not loved. The flame grew a little brighter on the day I discovered how they really talked about me when I wasn't around. I had gone to David's house in Whitestone to drop off a check for his daughter's summer camp, another emergency that had somehow become my responsibility. Sarah, his 16-year-old, was my grandniece, and I adored her quiet intelligence and artistic talent. She was one of the few family members who seemed genuinely glad to see me, who remembered details about my life and asked thoughtful questions about my work and interests. David wasn't home, but his wife Linda let me in and offered coffee while we waited for him to return from his contractor meeting. Linda had always been polite to me, though never warm, and I appreciated the gesture. We sat in their renovated kitchen, with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, improvements that my investment in David's business had partially funded, making small talk about the weather and Sarah's college plans. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but as I walked down the hallway, I heard Linda talking on her phone in the living room. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, the way people talk when sharing gossip they know they shouldn't. "Oh, she's here again," Linda was saying. "David's aunt, the one I told you about who always gives us money. Yeah, that's her. Margaret. No, no kids, never married. I think she's kind of pathetic, honestly, always trying to buy her way into family events. David says she has plenty of money saved up, no real expenses, so it's not like she can't afford it. I know, right? Some people just have nothing else going on in their lives. I stood frozen in the hallway, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. Pathetic. Buying my way into family events, nothing else going on in my life. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just the words themselves, but the assumptions behind them, the dismissive tone, the complete lack of awareness that I might have feelings or dignity or dreams of my own. I managed to compose myself enough to return to the kitchen, decline Linda's small talk, and leave the check on their counter with a brief note. I drove home in a daze, replaying that conversation over and over, wondering how many similar conversations had happened behind my back over the years. That night, I opened the faded blue notebook where I kept track of my family contributions and really looked at the numbers for the first time in years. $43,000. But that was just the major expenses I had recorded. There were hundreds of smaller transactions. Cash given for gas money, groceries bought for family dinners I wasn't invited to enjoy, gifts purchased for occasions where my own presence was barely tolerated. I calculated that over the past 15 years, I had given my family almost $60,000. $60,000 that could have been invested in stocks, could have earned compound interest, could have funded my own retirement dreams. $60,000 that could have bought me a small condo, a reliable car, or years of comfortable living without constant worry about making ends meet. Instead, it had bought me the privilege of being called pathetic behind my back. That's when the flame of anger finally became a fire. But even then, even with the evidence of their contempt burning in my chest, I wasn't ready to act. The patterns of a lifetime are not easily broken, and fear still outweighed fury. I told myself that Linda's opinion didn't represent the whole family, that maybe she was just having a bad day, that I was reading too much into casual conversation. I continued my routine of financial support for another few months, though each check felt heavier in my hand and each request stung a little deeper. Patricia called about wedding expenses, and I found myself agreeing to contribute $4,000 toward the venue rental and catering. David needed help covering his spring tax bill, and I transferred $2,000 from my savings account to his checking account. Jennifer wanted to attend a professional development conference in California, and I sent her $1,500 for registration and travel expenses. But something had shifted inside me. I started paying attention to the details of these requests, the timing, the casual assumptions. Patricia could afford a destination bachelorette party weekend in the Hamptons, but needed me to cover part of her wedding costs. David could buy season tickets to the Yankees, but couldn't manage his quarterly taxes. Jennifer could afford weekly manicures and expensive coffee, but needed financial help for career development. I also started noticing how they spoke to me differently during these financial transactions. The false warmth in their voices when they needed something, the quick subject changes when I tried to talk about my own life, the way conversations ended abruptly once the money was promised. I was witnessing the mechanics of manipulation in real time, and it was both enlightening and devastating. The most painful revelation came 2 weeks before Patricia's wedding, when I accidentally discovered how the family had been discussing my role in the event. I had offered to help with wedding preparations, partly because I wanted to feel useful and partly because I was secretly hoping to spend some quality time with my sister during this important milestone in her life. Patricia had accepted my offer but gave me tasks that kept me away from the main planning activities: addressing invitation envelopes at home, researching different florists by phone, picking up supplies from various vendors around the city. One afternoon, I was dropping off programs that I had helped proofread when I arrived at Patricia's house earlier than expected. I could hear voices in the kitchen, so I knocked and called out to let them know I was there. But before anyone answered, I heard Jennifer's voice floating through the open window. "So where are we going to put Aunt Maggie during the photographs? She doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic you're going for." Patricia's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "I know, right? She's so frumpy. And that dress she bought. Did you see it? Navy blue with those little pearl buttons like something from 1985. But what can you do? She's paying for half the venue, so we have to include her somehow. Maybe we can put her in the back row of the family photos. Or better yet, maybe she could be the one taking the pictures." This was David's voice, and I could hear the amusement in his tone. "Oh my God, yes," Jennifer giggled. "She'd probably love that. She's always trying to be helpful." "The thing is," Patricia continued, and her voice took on a more serious tone, "we need to be careful not to upset her before the wedding. We still need her to cover the final payment to the caterer. But after that," there was a pause, and then she continued in a lower voice that I had to strain to hear, Honestly, I'm getting tired of always managing her feelings. It's exhausting. Managing my feelings. As if my emotional needs were a burden they graciously shouldered, rather than a natural part of family relationships. I stood outside that window feeling like I was watching my own funeral, listening to people discuss how to dispose of my presence while still extracting maximum benefit from my wallet. The casual cruelty of their conversation was matched by the casual assumption that I existed solely for their convenience. But the most devastating part was hearing Patricia, my own sister, describe my love and generosity as something to be managed and minimized. Every check I had written, every crisis I had helped resolve, every time I had put their needs before my own, all of it had been filed away in their minds as evidence of my pathetic desperation rather than expressions of family loyalty. I quietly left the programs on Patricia's doorstep and drove home, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. For the first time in 15 years, I seriously considered cutting off all contact with my family. Not because I didn't love them, but because I was finally understanding that they didn't love me back. Not in any way that mattered. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the blue notebook, a calculator, and my bank statements spread out before me. I added up every dollar I had given them over the years, every sacrifice I had made, every time I had chosen their needs over my own financial security. The total came to over $70,000 when I included all the small cash gifts, grocery runs, and miscellaneous expenses. $70,000. The down payment on a nice apartment, a new car, and several years of comfortable living. The foundation of a real retirement fund. A lifetime of small luxuries and experiences that I had denied myself in order to fund their dreams. And what did I have to show for it? A notebook full of numbers. Phone calls that came only when they needed something. A place at the far end of the table at family gatherings. The privilege of being discussed like a problem to be managed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what my life might look like if I simply stopped. Stopped answering calls about money emergencies. Stopped offering to help with expenses I couldn't really afford. Stopped accepting invitations to events where I was treated as unpaid help rather than honored family. The fantasy was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it might mean losing the only family I had, even if that family barely acknowledged my existence. Liberating because it might mean finding out who I was when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to others, but I still wasn't ready to turn fantasy into reality. The wedding was less than 2 weeks away, and I had already committed to the final caterer payment. I told myself I would get through the wedding, help Patricia celebrate her special day, and then maybe start setting some boundaries afterward. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed home. The morning of Patricia's wedding dawned clear and crisp, with that particular October light that makes everything look like a painting. I spent extra time getting ready, wanting to look my best for my sister's special day despite what I had overheard about my frumpy appearance. The navy dress didn't look so bad when I paired it with Mom's pearl earrings and the small silver bracelet I had bought myself for Christmas. My hair, styled the day before at Mrs. Kim's salon, fell in soft waves around my face, and I had even splurged on professional makeup for the first time in years. Looking in my bathroom mirror, I thought I looked pretty good for 72. Not fashionable, perhaps, not glamorous, but dignified and presentable. I practiced smiling, trying to project the kind of warmth and joy that a sister should feel on such an important day. I arrived at the church an hour early, wanting to help with any last-minute preparations, and hoping to have a few quiet moments with Patricia before the ceremony began. The morning air was crisp and smelled of fallen leaves, and the old stone church looked beautiful in the golden October sunlight. But when I entered through the side door that led to the bride's preparation room, Patricia barely glanced up from her makeup mirror. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, women I recognized but didn't really know, friends from her book club and walking group who seemed to share an easy intimacy that excluded me entirely. "Oh, Maggie, you're early," she said without real enthusiasm, not bothering to look away from her reflection. "Could you check with the florist about the centerpieces? I want to make sure they got the color right for the roses." Not, "Good morning, sister," or "Thank you for everything you've done," or even, "You look nice." Just another task to keep me busy and out of the way. I spent the next hour running various errands, checking on flowers and photographers and making sure the guest book was properly positioned. Every time I tried to connect with Patricia, to give her a hug, to tell her how beautiful she looked, to share in the excitement of her special day, I was redirected to another practical matter that needed attention. The ceremony itself was lovely, as I mentioned before, but I noticed things during the service that hurt in small, sharp ways. Patricia had chosen David to walk her down the aisle instead of letting me share that honor. The programs listed Jennifer as matron of honor and David as giving away the bride, but my name appeared nowhere except in the small print list of family members. During the Unity Candle ceremony, Patricia and Robert lit their candle together, But the family members invited to participate were limited to their children and grandchildren, none of whom were actually my blood relatives. I sat in my third-row pew feeling like a stranger at my own sister's wedding, watching a celebration of love and family that somehow didn't include space for me. After the ceremony, as guests moved from the church to the adjacent parish hall for the reception, I found myself caught in that awkward transition period where people mill around making small talk while waiting for the official festivities to begin. I tried to join conversations with other family members, but everyone seemed to be part of established groups that had no natural opening for me. That's when I made the mistake of positioning myself near the head table, trying to figure out the seating arrangements and hoping to catch Patricia's attention for just a moment. I wasn't blocking anything, wasn't interfering with any preparations, just standing quietly in my navy dress with the pearl buttons, holding my small purse and trying to look like I belonged. But Patricia noticed me there, and instead of greeting me with warmth or gratitude or even basic politeness, she saw me as an obstruction to be managed. "Margaret, you'll block the photos if you stand there." Those 8 words, delivered in front of dozens of wedding guests, contained within them the summary of my entire relationship with my family. I was not a person to be included, but an obstacle to be moved. Not a sister celebrating a joyous occasion, but a problem to be solved. Not someone whose presence added value, but someone whose existence interfered with the perfect picture they wanted to create. The room seemed to freeze for just a moment, though probably no one else noticed. Conversations continued around me. Glasses clinked. The photographer adjusted his equipment, but I felt like I was standing in a spotlight, exposed and humiliated, branded with my true status in this family's hierarchy. I mumbled some automatic apology and backed away toward the hallway that led to the kitchen, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Behind me, I could hear Patricia laughing with her photographer about camera angles and lighting, as if nothing significant had happened, as if she hadn't just publicly reduced me to the status of unwanted furniture. In the hallway, alone except for the sound of celebration filtering through the closed doors, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. This wasn't an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the crystallization of 15 years of being treated as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of love and respect. I looked down at my purse where the checkbook rested beside my tissues and reading glasses, and the small silver compact that had been my mother's. That checkbook represented every choice I had made to prioritize their needs over my own dignity, every time I had bought temporary acceptance with permanent financial sacrifice. But as I stood there in that church hallway, something inside me finally shifted from hurt to anger to something much more powerful: clarity. For the first time in 15 years, I saw exactly what I needed to do. I pulled out my cell phone, not a smartphone, just my simple flip phone that made calls and sent text messages, and dialed the number for my bank. It was Saturday afternoon, but the automated system would allow me to check my account balance and transfer funds if necessary. After navigating through the menu options, I learned that my savings account contained 8,147, all that remained of a lifetime of careful budgeting after years of family contributions. My checking account had 156 hours. In total, less than $10,000 to my name at age 72, after a lifetime of work and sacrifice. But in my purse was a checkbook that still gave me access to something much more valuable than money: the power to choose how I would be treated. I thought about Patricia inside the reception hall, probably wondering where I had gone, but not wondering enough to come look for me. I thought about David and Jennifer, likely relieved that the awkward aunt had removed herself from the photo opportunities. I thought about all the strangers at this wedding who had just witnessed my public humiliation and would probably forget about it before the cake was served. And then I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who had taken me to the emergency room without being asked. I thought about Sarah, David's daughter, who always hugged me genuinely whenever we met. I thought about the art classes I had always wanted to take but couldn't afford after sending money to solve everyone else's problems. Standing in that hallway, I made the first independent decision I had made in years. I was not going back into that reception hall to be ignored, patronized, and treated like an obligation. I was not going to sit at whatever distant table they had assigned me, eating rubber chicken and pretending to enjoy myself while watching other people celebrate their happiness. I was not going to contribute $1 more to the mythology that my money could buy me love or acceptance or even basic human decency. Instead, I walked out of that church and got into my 15-year-old Honda Civic, the same car I had been driving for over a decade because I couldn't afford to replace it after covering everyone else's expenses. I drove home to my small apartment in Astoria, where I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with the blue notebook and my checkbook spread out before me. Then I did something I had never done before. I started making phone calls. The first call was to my bank, using the customer service number for more complex transactions. I asked them to put a hold on any automatic transfers from my accounts and to require additional verification for any large withdrawals. I also inquired about investment options for my remaining savings, something I had never felt secure enough to consider when my money was constantly flowing out to family emergencies. The second call was to my nephew David. When he answered, I could hear music and laughter in the background. The reception was clearly in full swing. "Aunt Maggie? Where are you? Patricia's been looking for you." "David, I need you to listen carefully. I'm not coming back to the reception, and I need you to know that things are going to be different from now on." There was a pause, and I could hear him stepping away from the party noise. "What do you mean? Are you sick? Do you need me to come get you?" "I mean that I will no longer be available to solve everyone's financial problems. I've spent 15 years and over $70,000 trying to buy my way into this family, and today I realized that no amount of money will ever make me anything more than a convenience to you all." Another pause, longer this time. When David spoke again, his voice had changed from concern to something sharper, more defensive. "Maggie, I don't know what you think you heard or what's upset you, but this isn't the time or place for this conversation. It's Patricia's wedding day." "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "It's Patricia's wedding day, the wedding I helped pay for, the reception I was just asked to remove myself from so I wouldn't ruin the photos. I think the timing is perfect." Before he could respond, I ended the call. The third call was to Jennifer, who didn't answer. I left a brief voicemail. "Jennifer, this is Aunt Maggie. I want you to know that I will no longer be able to help with financial emergencies or contribute to family expenses. I hope you understand that this decision comes from a place of self-respect rather than anger. I wish you all the best." The fourth call was the hardest. Patricia. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the strain in her voice even over the background noise of her reception. "Maggie, what the hell are you doing? People are asking where you are, and David said you had some kind of breakdown. You're embarrassing me on my wedding day." Embarrassing her. Even now, even after publicly humiliating me in front of her wedding guests, she could only see my pain through the lens of how it affected her special day. "Patricia, I called to tell you that I won't be contributing to any more family expenses. The check I wrote for your catering was the last money you'll receive from me." "What are you talking about? Is this about the photo thing?" "Jesus, Maggie, you're so sensitive. It wasn't personal, we just needed to organize people for the pictures." "It was personal to me. Everything has been personal to me. Every check I've written, every crisis I've helped solve, every time I've put your needs ahead of my own financial security. It's all been personal to me because you're my family. But I've realized that I'm not really your family. I'm just someone you call when you need money." Her voice became sharp, defensive in the way that people get when they're caught in behavior they know is wrong but don't want to acknowledge. "That's not true, and you know it. We love you, Maggie. But you have to understand that we have real responsibilities. Children, mortgages, careers. You don't understand that kind of pressure because you've never had those obligations. Never had those obligations. As if the choice to remain unmarried and childless had been a luxury rather than a circumstance. As if my simpler lifestyle meant my needs mattered less than theirs. You're right that I don't have children or a mortgage. But I do have a responsibility to take care of myself. And I've been failing at that job for 15 years while taking care of all of you instead." There was a long pause, and when Patricia spoke again, her voice was cold, in a way I had never heard before. "Fine. If that's how you want to be, then fine. But don't expect us to come running when you're old and sick and need help. Don't expect us to be there for you if you're going to abandon us now." The threat was delivered so casually, so naturally, that I realized this dynamic had always been transactional in her mind. My financial support in exchange for the promise of future care, the illusion of family obligation, the suggestion that love could be earned through service. "I understand," I said quietly, "and I accept those terms." I hung up before she could respond. The silence in my apartment felt enormous after those phone calls. For 15 years, my phone had been constantly ringing with requests and emergencies and quick favors. Now the silence stretched out like a blank page, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. I made myself another cup of tea and sat by my living room window, looking out at the early evening light over Queens. Traffic moved steadily along Northern Boulevard. People going home from Saturday afternoon errands. Couples walking hand in hand toward restaurants and movie theaters. Teenagers gathering in small groups outside the bodega on the corner. For the first time in years, I had no immediate obligations to anyone else. No crises to solve, no checks to write, no phone calls to return. The freedom felt strange and uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that were the right size after years of tight ones that had caused permanent damage. But as the evening wore on, something else began to emerge from beneath the strangeness. Relief. I wasn't going to spend tomorrow wondering how much Patricia's wedding weekend would ultimately cost me. I wasn't going to field phone calls asking for help with credit card payments or car repairs or medical bills. I wasn't going to lie awake at night calculating whether I could afford groceries after covering someone else's emergency. For the first time in 15 years, my money was my own. That night, I opened a bottle of wine that I had been saving for a special occasion, a decent Pinot Grigio that had been gathering dust in my kitchen cabinet for over 2 years because I could never justify opening it just for myself. I poured myself a glass and raised it in a toast to my empty apartment. "To Margaret Callahan," I said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but also strangely powerful, who finally learned that she deserves better. The wine tasted like freedom, but freedom, I discovered over the next few days, can be more complicated than continued servitude. Monday morning arrived with the usual sounds of Queens waking up, garbage trucks rumbling past, Mrs. Rodriguez leaving for her housekeeping job at the hotel near LaGuardia Airport, children walking to the bus stop for school. But for me, the morning felt different. I didn't wake up with the low-level anxiety that had become my normal state, the constant mental calculation of which family member might need what today. Instead, I woke up with questions I hadn't allowed myself to ask in years. What did I want to do with this day? What did I want to do with this life? Who was Margaret Callahan when she wasn't serving as the family bank? The questions were harder to answer than I had anticipated. I had breakfast at my kitchen table, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, but eaten slowly and with attention instead of being gulped down while rushing to handle someone else's crisis. I read the newspaper from front to back, something I rarely had time for when my mornings were interrupted by phone calls about emergencies that somehow always required my immediate financial attention. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia's number, and for a moment, my old conditioning kicked in, the automatic impulse to answer immediately, to be available whenever family needed me. But I let it ring through to voicemail. 20 minutes later, it rang again. David's number this time. Again, I let it ring. By noon, I had received 6 phone calls and 4 text messages, all from family members, all variations on the theme of, "We need to talk," and "Don't be unreasonable," and "Let's work this out." But notably, none of them included apologies for how they had treated me, acknowledgement of their financial dependence on me, or recognition that their behavior might have been hurtful. Instead, the messages focused on how my withdrawal was affecting them. David wrote, "The tax thing is really urgent, Maggie. I can't wait until you get over whatever this is about." Jennifer texted, "I already registered for the conference. You can't just change your mind about helping now." Even in their attempts to reconcile, they could only see me as a resource that had temporarily malfunctioned rather than a person who had reached her breaking point. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself. Not for gifts for other people, not for contributions to family gatherings, just for things that I wanted. I walked to the small shopping district along Northern Boulevard, past the familiar storefronts I had hurried past for years, while focused on getting to banks and ATMs to solve other people's problems. I bought myself a new sweater, soft blue cashmere, marked down from the previous season, but still more expensive than anything I had purchased for myself in over a decade. It felt luxurious against my skin and made my eyes look brighter in the dressing room mirror. I bought comfortable walking shoes to replace the worn-out sneakers I had been wearing for 3 years. I bought a small potted orchid for my kitchen windowsill just because it was beautiful and I had always wanted one. The total for these purchases came to less than half of what I had contributed to Patricia's wedding, but they felt more significant than anything I had bought in years because they were chosen for my own pleasure rather than someone else's approval. That evening, I called Sarah, David's 16-year-old daughter, the one family member who had always seemed to value my presence rather than my financial contributions. She answered on the second ring with genuine warmth in her voice. "Hi, Grandaunt Maggie. How are you? Dad said you left early from Aunt Patricia's wedding. Are you okay?" I loved that she called me Grandaunt Maggie, a title she had invented when she was small to distinguish me from her maternal grandmothers. And I loved that her first question was about my well-being, rather than some crisis that needed my attention. "I'm better than I've been in years, sweetheart. But I want you to know that some things are going to change with the family, and I don't want you to be caught in the middle of any adult drama." "What kind of changes?" I explained, as gently as I could, that I would no longer be able to provide financial help to family members, including contributions to her college fund or summer activities. I made it clear that this had nothing to do with her personally, and everything to do with my need to take care of myself after years of neglecting my own needs. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something that surprised me. "Honestly, Grandaunt Maggie, I always felt bad about how much money you gave us. It never seemed fair that you were always paying for stuff while everyone else just expected you to handle things. You noticed that?" Of course, I noticed. I'm not blind, and it always bothered me that nobody ever asked what you needed or wanted. It was like you only existed to solve everyone else's problems. Out of the mouths of babes, this 16-year-old had seen what the adults in our family had either ignored or chosen not to acknowledge. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, she continued. And just so you know, I love spending time with you whether you can afford to buy me things or not. Maybe we could just hang out sometime soon? Like, actually spend time together instead of always talking about money stuff? That phone call was the first truly positive family interaction I had experienced in years, and it gave me hope that cutting off financial support didn't have to mean cutting off all meaningful relationships. Over the next week, the pressure from other family members intensified. Patricia called daily, alternating between guilt trips, "I can't believe you're punishing me on my honeymoon," and threats, "Robert's family thinks you're completely unstable after the way you acted at the wedding." David showed up at my apartment building unannounced, buzzing my intercom and demanding to come upstairs to talk sense into me. I didn't let him in. Jennifer tried a different approach, sending me a long email detailing her financial struggles and the ways that my withdrawal of support would damage her career prospects. The email was calculated to trigger every guilt response she had learned to activate over the years, but reading it, I could see the manipulation tactics that had once been invisible to me. None of them asked how I was feeling. None of them inquired about my own financial situation or acknowledged that I might have needs of my own. None of them seemed to consider that their treatment of me at the wedding might have been hurtful or inappropriate. Instead, their focus was entirely on getting me back into my previous role as the family's financial problem solver. But something had shifted inside me during that moment in the church hallway. For the first time in 15 years, I had seen myself clearly through their eyes, not as a beloved family member whose contributions were appreciated, but as a resource to be managed and exploited. And once you see yourself that way, once you recognize the dynamic that has shaped your relationships, you can't unsee it. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Rachel Martinez had an office in a converted house in Forest Hills, about 20 minutes from my apartment by bus. I found her through my insurance company's website, choosing her partly because she specialized in family dynamics and financial abuse, and partly because she was the only therapist in my plan who had availability within 2 weeks. The first session was awkward. I had never been to therapy before. I'd always believed that family problems should be solved within the family, and that paying someone to listen to your troubles was self-indulgent. But sitting in Dr. Martinez's comfortable office with its soft lighting and tissue boxes strategically placed within reach, I found myself telling my story to a stranger for the first time. Dr. Martinez listened without judgment as I described 15 years of financial exploitation disguised as family obligation. She nodded when I talked about the guilt I felt for cutting off support, the fear that I might have overreacted, the loneliness that came with setting boundaries. "Margaret," she said when I finished my initial recounting, "what you've described is financial abuse. The fact that it's happening within a family doesn't make it less damaging or less real. Financial abuse." I had never heard that term applied to family relationships before, but it fit perfectly. The gradual escalation of requests, the emotional manipulation when I hesitated to provide money, the way my worth was measured entirely by my willingness to solve other people's problems with my wallet. "But they're my family," I said, voicing the guilt that had kept me trapped for so many years. "They're the only family I have. Family relationships should be based on mutual love and respect," Dr. Martinez replied gently. "If someone only values you for what you can provide financially, that's not a genuine family relationship. That's exploitation with a blood relation attached." Over the next several weeks of therapy, I began to understand patterns that had shaped my entire adult life. The way my childhood role as the responsible one had evolved into being the family's financial caretaker. The way I had confused being needed with being loved, had mistaken financial dependence for emotional connection. Dr. Martinez helped me see that my family's behavior after I set boundaries was actually proving my point rather than disproving it. If their relationships with me had been based on genuine affection, they would have been concerned about my well-being and interested in understanding why I felt compelled to withdraw support. Instead, their focus remained entirely on getting me to resume my previous role as their financial solution. "People who love you," Dr. Martinez explained, "want you to be happy and healthy even if it's occasionally inconvenient for them. People who are using you get angry when you prioritize your own needs because it interferes with their agenda." The therapy sessions became an anchor in my week, a place where I could process the guilt and fear and occasional regret that came with changing fundamental family dynamics. Dr. Martinez helped me develop strategies for dealing with manipulation tactics, taught me to recognize the difference between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises designed to reactivate my caretaking responses. Most importantly, she helped me start imagining what my life could look like when it was organized around my own needs and interests rather than everyone else's problems. "What did you enjoy doing before you took on the role of family financial manager?" she asked during one session. I had to think for a long time before answering. It had been so many years since I had pursued activities for my own pleasure that I had almost forgotten what those interests were. "I used to love to read," I said finally, "and I always wanted to try painting or pottery. I used to go to museums and art galleries before I started spending all my money on family emergencies." "What's stopping you from pursuing those interests now?" "Nothing," I realized. For the first time in 15 years, nothing was stopping me except my own unfamiliarity with the concept of prioritizing my own happiness. That weekend, I took the subway into Manhattan and spent the afternoon at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I hadn't been there in over 8 years, not since before Mom got sick and my life became entirely organized around other people's crises. I wandered through the galleries at my own pace, stopping to really look at paintings that caught my attention, reading placards, and taking my time to absorb the beauty around me. In the museum gift shop, I bought myself a book about Impressionist painters and a small reproduction of a Monet water lily painting that reminded me of the ponds in Central Park. The book cost $35 and the print was $22, less than I used to spend on a single lunch when I was meeting family members to discuss their latest financial emergencies. On the subway ride home, holding my museum purchases and feeling truly relaxed for the first time in months, I realized something profound. I hadn't thought about money problems, family crises, or anyone's urgent needs for an entire afternoon. I had simply existed as a person with her own interests and preferences, someone worthy of beauty and art and quiet contemplation. It was a revelation. The next week, I enrolled in a pottery class at the Queens Community Center. The class met on Tuesday evenings for 8 weeks, cost $60 total, and required no advance experience. I was nervous walking into that first session, worried that I would be too old or too awkward among the other students. But the class was wonderful. The instructor, a patient woman named Carol, who had been teaching pottery for 20 years, welcomed me warmly and guided my hands as I learned to center clay on the wheel. The other students ranged in age from college kids to retirees, and everyone was focused on their own creative process rather than judging anyone else's skill level. There was something deeply satisfying about working with clay, about the tactile experience of shaping something beautiful with my own hands. When I was focused on keeping the clay centered, on maintaining the right pressure as I pulled up the walls of a bowl or vase, I couldn't think about anything else. The constant mental chatter about family drama and financial worries simply quieted. After the second class, I stayed late to practice, losing track of time as I worked on a small ceramic bowl. When Carol finally announced that she needed to close up the studio, I looked at the clock and realized I had been working for 3 hours straight, without once checking my phone or worrying about whether anyone needed anything from me. The bowl I had made was imperfect, lopsided and amateur, but it was mine. I had created it for the simple pleasure of creation, with no purpose other than the joy of making something beautiful with my own hands. During the third week of pottery class, my phone rang while I was wedging clay. The caller ID showed Patricia's number, and for a split second, my old conditioning kicked in, the automatic impulse to drop everything and answer immediately. But I looked at the clay in my hands, at the peaceful studio around me, at the other students quietly focused on their own projects, and I made a conscious choice. I let it ring through to voicemail. That small act of choosing my own priorities over someone else's demands felt like a victory. After class, I listened to the message. Patricia's voice was sharp with frustration. "Maggie, I don't know what's wrong with you, but this silent treatment is ridiculous. Robert's car broke down and we need $1,500 for repairs. I know you're mad about something, but this is an emergency. Call me back." An emergency. Everything had always been an emergency in my family's narrative. Robert's car, Jennifer's conference, David's taxes, every expense became urgent when framed as my responsibility to solve. But sitting in my car outside the community center, still feeling calm from the meditative work of shaping clay, I could see this emergency for what it really was. Robert's car problem that had somehow become my financial obligation, without any discussion of whether I could afford it, wanted to provide it, or agreed that it was my responsibility. I deleted the message without returning the call. The next morning, David appeared at my apartment building again. This time, he brought reinforcements. Jennifer and her teenage son Michael, my grandnephew. I watched from my window as they stood on the sidewalk below, David talking animatedly while Jennifer gestured toward my building. Michael looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be there but had been drafted into this family intervention. My intercom buzzed insistently. David's voice crackled through the speaker. "Maggie, we know you're up there. We're not leaving until you come down and talk to us like an adult." like an adult. As if my decision to stop funding their lifestyle choices was childish rather than the most adult thing I had done in years. I didn't respond to the intercom, but I did watch from my window as they waited on the sidewalk for over an hour. Jennifer paced back and forth, checking her phone repeatedly. David leaned against a parked car with his arms crossed, projecting the kind of stubborn determination that I recognized from our childhood. He had always been able to outlast opposition through sheer persistence. But Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable as the minutes passed. At one point, he said something to his mother that I couldn't hear from 5 floors up, but I could see her sharp response and his flinch. He pulled out his phone and seemed to be texting someone, probably a friend who was wondering why he was spending his Saturday morning standing outside his elderly great-aunt's apartment building. Finally, Jennifer grabbed Michael's arm and marched him toward the subway station, leaving David alone on the sidewalk. He waited another 20 minutes, looking up at my window several times before finally giving up and following them. That evening, I received a text message from Michael. "Hi, Great Aunt Maggie. I'm sorry about today. Mom made me come along. I think you're right to take care of yourself. Hope you're doing okay." That simple message from a 17-year-old boy showed more emotional maturity and genuine care than I had received from his parents in years. The holidays were approaching: Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and I realized that for the first time in over a decade, I wouldn't be hosting, contributing to, or organizing any family celebrations. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. In previous years, my small apartment had been the gathering place for family dinners because I was the one willing to cook, clean, and pay for everything. Patricia's house in Bayside was larger and more comfortable, but she preferred to host only when someone else handled the work and expenses. David and Jennifer lived further out in the suburbs and claimed their homes weren't suitable for entertaining large groups. So my one-bedroom apartment in Astoria had become family headquarters by default, with me providing all the food, drinks, decorations, and cleanup, while everyone else provided company and conversation that usually excluded me from meaningful participation. This year, I was spending the holidays alone. For the first time in my adult life, nobody was expecting me to organize anything, cook anything, or pay for anything. The prospect was both exciting and deeply lonely. I decorated my apartment for Halloween with small pumpkins and autumn leaves, decorations chosen for my own enjoyment rather than to impress family members. I bought candy for trick-or-treaters, though living on the 5th floor, I didn't expect many visitors. On Halloween night, I watched classic horror movies on television while eating chocolate intended for children who never appeared at my door. It was peaceful in a way that family gatherings had never been. For Thanksgiving, I made a reservation at a small restaurant in Forest Hills that advertised traditional holiday dinners for those who want to celebrate without the work. The idea of paying someone else to cook my Thanksgiving dinner while I sat peacefully eating without responsibility for anyone else's enjoyment felt like the ultimate luxury. The restaurant was about half full on Thanksgiving Day, mostly elderly couples and single people who had chosen restaurant dining over family obligations. Our server, a college student working through the holiday, was cheerful and attentive. The turkey was perfectly cooked. The sides were generous, and I ate slowly while reading a book I had been looking forward to starting. Nobody asked me to carve anything, serve anything, or clean anything. Nobody complained about the food, or asked me to change the television channel, or demanded attention for their various greens fees and dramas. For 2 hours, I simply enjoyed a good meal in peaceful solitude. Walking home from the restaurant, I passed houses decorated with autumn leaves and filled with warm light from family gatherings. Through windows, I could see people laughing, children running around, multiple generations gathered around dinner tables. For a moment, I felt a sharp pang of loneliness, a wondering about what my own family was doing, whether they were missing me or even thinking about me. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by something more profound: gratitude. Gratitude for the choice to spend my holiday in peace rather than in service to people who took my efforts for granted. Gratitude for the financial security that came from not constantly funding other people's celebrations. Gratitude for the discovery that being alone was not the same thing as being lonely. By December, something unexpected had happened. I was genuinely happier than I had been in years. The pottery class had ended, but I had joined another session that focused on glazing and firing techniques. My small apartment now contained several pieces of pottery that I had made with my own hands, bowls and mugs, and a small vase that held the silk flowers I had bought for myself at the craft store. They weren't masterpieces, but they were mine, created for the simple joy of creation. I had also joined a book club that met twice a month at the Queens Public Library. The group was small, 8 regular members ranging in age from 40-something to 80-something, and our discussions were lively and thoughtful. For the first time in years, I was having intellectual conversations about subjects that had nothing to do with family drama or financial crises. My savings account had grown by almost $3,000 since October, money that would have previously disappeared into various family emergencies, but now remained available for my own needs and desires. I had opened a small investment account and was learning about stocks and mutual funds, financial planning concepts that had seemed impossible when my money was constantly flowing outward. Most importantly, I was learning who Margaret Callahan was when she wasn't defined by her usefulness to others. I liked this version of myself. She was calmer, more confident, more focused on activities that brought genuine satisfaction rather than obligatory service. She bought books and art supplies and ingredients for meals she wanted to cook, rather than meals designed to please difficult people. She made choices based on her own preferences rather than other people's expectations. But the most significant change was internal. I no longer woke up each morning with the low-level anxiety that had been my constant companion for years, the mental preparation for whatever crisis or demand might interrupt my day. Instead, I woke up curious about what I might choose to do with the hours ahead. 2 days before Christmas, I received an unexpected visitor. I was reading in my living room, wrapped in a soft blanket and enjoying the afternoon light that streamed through my windows, when someone knocked on my apartment door. Not the intercom downstairs, but the actual door to my apartment on the 5th floor. I looked through the peephole and saw Sarah, David's daughter, holding a small wrapped package and looking uncertain. I opened the door immediately, worried that something might be wrong. "Hi, Grandaunt Maggie," she said, her breath visible in the cold hallway air. "I hope it's okay that I came by. I have something for you." "Of course it's okay, sweetheart. Come in, get warm." "How did you get here?" "I took the subway from school. I had a half day today for winter break." She stepped into my apartment and looked around with interest, as if seeing it for the first time. "Your place looks really nice. I like all the pottery you made." I made us hot chocolate, and we sat together in my living room, Sarah still holding the wrapped package. She seemed nervous, more serious than usual for a 17-year-old. "Grandaunt Maggie, I wanted to give you this before Christmas, and I wanted to talk to you about some stuff without my parents around." She handed me the package, which was surprisingly heavy for its size. Inside was a ceramic mug that she had made in her high school art class, glazed in beautiful shades of blue and green that reminded me of sea glass. "I made this for you because I know you're taking pottery classes now," she said, "and because I wanted you to have something made just for you, not because you paid for it or earned it or anything like that. Just because you matter to me." I felt tears starting in my eyes as I turned the mug over in my hands, admiring the smooth glasswork and the comfortable weight of it. "Sarah, this is beautiful. This is the most thoughtful gift I've received in years. I also wanted to tell you that I think you did the right thing," she continued, her voice gaining confidence. "Everyone's been talking about how you cut off the money and how difficult you're being, but I don't think you were being difficult at all. I think you were being smart." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been watching this family my whole life, and I've seen how everyone treats you like a bank instead of a person. And I've seen how you always say yes even when it's obviously hard for you financially. It never seemed fair to me." This 17-year-old was voicing insights that had taken me decades to recognize. "I wanted you to know that I love spending time with you whether you can give me money or not," she continued. "Actually, I like it better when we're not talking about money stuff, because then we can just be ourselves with each other." We spent the next 2 hours talking about her art classes, her college plans, her interests in environmental science and sustainable agriculture. She asked about my pottery classes and book club, seemed genuinely interested in my activities and opinions. It was the kind of conversation I had always wanted to have with family members, but rarely experienced because our interactions were usually dominated by their problems and needs. As she was getting ready to leave, Sarah said something that stayed with me for weeks afterward. "You know, Grandaunt Maggie, everyone keeps saying you've changed since you stopped giving money to people, but I don't think you've changed at all. I think you just finally started being yourself instead of being what everyone else needed you to be." From the mouths of babes, indeed. That Christmas was the first in 15 years that I spent entirely on my own terms. I had declined all family invitations, not out of spite, but because I knew that attending would mean falling back into my old role as helper, server, and financial contributor, while being excluded from genuine participation in the celebration. Instead, I created my own Christmas traditions. I attended Christmas Eve service at St. Demetrios Greek Orthodox Church down the street, drawn by their reputation for beautiful music and welcoming atmosphere. The service was conducted partially in Greek and partially in English, and while I didn't understand all the words, the beauty of the ancient liturgy and the soaring voices of the choir filled me with a peace I hadn't felt during crowded family gatherings. On Christmas morning, I gave myself permission to sleep in, then made a special breakfast of French toast with real maple syrup, the good stuff I could now afford because I wasn't constantly sending money elsewhere. I opened the small presents I had bought for myself: art supplies, books, a soft cashmere scarf in my favorite shade of blue. In the afternoon, I volunteered at a soup kitchen in Long Island City, serving Christmas dinner to homeless individuals and families. The work was satisfying in a way that family obligations had never been. These people genuinely needed help, expressed genuine gratitude, and made no assumptions about my continued availability for future service. One elderly man, probably about my age, thanked me for the meal and wished me a Merry Christmas with such sincere warmth that I felt more appreciated in that moment than I had during years of family gatherings. That evening, I sat in my living room looking at the small Christmas tree I had decorated for myself. Nothing elaborate, just a tabletop tree with simple ornaments and white lights. But it was mine, chosen and decorated according to my preferences rather than someone else's expectations. My phone had remained mostly quiet all day. No calls demanding my presence at family gatherings, no emergencies requiring my immediate financial attention. The silence was peaceful, rather than lonely. Just before midnight, I received a text message from Patricia. "Merry Christmas, Maggie. I hope you're happy alone." The message was clearly intended to be hurtful, a final jab designed to make me feel guilty for choosing my own well-being over her convenience. But reading it, I felt only pity for someone who couldn't imagine any form of happiness that didn't involve controlling or exploiting other people. I deleted the message without responding. As the new year approached, I found myself reflecting on the transformation that had occurred over the past few months. The woman who had sat in that church hallway listening to her sister dismiss her as a photographic obstruction felt like a different person. Smaller, sadder, more desperate for approval that would never come. The woman I had become was still learning to prioritize her own needs, still occasionally guilt-ridden about setting boundaries, still sometimes lonely for family connection, but she was also stronger, more confident, more focused on building a life of genuine satisfaction rather than settling for the crumbs of conditional acceptance. In January, I made two significant decisions that felt like declarations of independence. First, I moved to a larger apartment. Not much larger, still a one-bedroom, but with better lighting, a small balcony, and a neighborhood that felt more like home. The rent was $90 more per month, well within my budget now that I wasn't constantly funding other people's expenses, and the balcony faced east toward Manhattan, offering beautiful views of the city skyline at sunset. Moving day was bittersweet. I packed up 15 years of life in the Astoria apartment, including memories both happy and painful. But carrying boxes up to my new fifth-floor walk-up in Sunnyside, I felt like I was literally moving toward a better version of my life. The new apartment had room for an easel near the living room window, space for my growing collection of pottery, and a kitchen table large enough for dinner parties if I ever chose to host them for friends, rather than obligation. Second, I scheduled a consultation with a financial advisor. Dr. Martinez had suggested that learning to manage my money more strategically might help me feel more secure about my decision to stop supporting family members financially. The advisor, a woman named Linda Chen who specialized in retirement planning for single women, reviewed my accounts and offered insights that were both encouraging and sobering. Encouraging because my years of careful budgeting had left me in better financial shape than I had realized. Sobering because the money I had given to family members over the years could have grown into a substantial retirement fund if invested wisely. The important thing, Linda said gently, is not to focus on what you can't change about the past, but to make smart decisions going forward. You have 15 to 20 good earning years left, and every dollar you save and invest now will compound significantly by the time you're ready to retire. She helped me open a Roth IRA and set up automatic monthly contributions that would grow tax-free for the next 2 decades. For the first time in my adult life, I was actively planning for my own financial future rather than reactive managing other people's crises. But the most significant change wasn't financial or geographical. It was emotional. I was learning to like my own company. This might seem like a small thing, but for someone who had spent decades defining herself through relationships with others, even exploitative relationships, discovering that I genuinely enjoyed spending time alone was revolutionary. I liked taking long walks through different Queens neighborhoods, stopping to admire architecture and gardens and street art that I had been too stressed to notice during years of constant family crisis management. I liked cooking elaborate meals for myself, trying recipes from cookbooks I checked out from the library, and eating slowly while listening to classical music. I liked having entire weekends with no obligations beyond my own interests and desires. I could spend Saturday morning at the farmer's market, Saturday afternoon at a museum, Saturday evening reading in bed without anyone demanding my attention, requiring my service, or needing my money. The freedom was intoxicating. In February, something unexpected happened. I started dating. Not intentionally, and not someone I met through any kind of formal dating process. Instead, I met Robert. Not Patricia's Robert, but a different Robert entirely, at the pottery studio where I had been taking classes. Robert Chen was 68 years old, a retired high school teacher who had started taking pottery classes after his wife died 3 years earlier. He was quiet and thoughtful, with gentle hands and a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually as we worked on our respective projects side by side. Our conversations began casually, comments about glazing techniques and kiln temperatures, but over several weeks we started staying after class to help clean up the studio, and our conversations expanded to books, movies, travel destinations we had always wanted to visit. He asked me to dinner in the most old-fashioned, courteous way possible, apologizing if he was being presumptuous, but mentioning that he had discovered a small Italian restaurant in Forest Hills that served authentic Roman cuisine. Would you be interested in trying it with me sometime? No pressure, of course. Our first dinner lasted 3 hours. Robert was an excellent listener and a thoughtful conversationalist, interested in my opinions and experiences in a way that felt completely foreign after years of family interactions focused on their needs and problems. He told me about his 38-year marriage to Elena, a mathematics teacher who had died of breast cancer after a 2-year battle. He spoke about her with love, but without the bitter grief that makes some widowers impossible to be around. He missed her, clearly, but had made peace with his loss and was ready to open his heart to new experiences. I told him about my family situation, not in detail, but enough to explain why a 72-year-old woman might be learning to live independently for the first time. He listened without judgment and offered insights that showed he understood complicated family dynamics from his own experience. Sometimes, he said over dessert, the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who place the most conditions on their affection. It takes courage to walk away from that pattern, even when you know it's hurting you. We started seeing each other regularly, not with the intensity of young romance, but with the comfortable appreciation of mature adults who have learned that companionship is a gift rather than a given. He introduced me to hiking trails in nearby parks. I shared my book club recommendations with him. We attended pottery workshops together and cooked meals for each other in our respective apartments. Most importantly, Robert treated me as an equal partner in whatever activities we chose to share. He split restaurant bills without discussion, contributed to groceries when we cooked together, and never assumed that I would handle logistics or planning simply because I was female. After decades of being expected to serve others, being treated as an equal felt like a luxury. Our relationship was comfortable rather than passionate, built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than desperate need or convenience. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who genuinely wanted my company rather than my services. In March, I received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed her number, and my policy had been to let family calls go to voicemail unless they were from Sarah. But something made me pick up, perhaps curiosity about why she was calling after months of silence. Aunt Maggie? Her voice was subdued, different from the demanding tone I had grown accustomed to over the years. Hello, Jennifer. I wanted to talk to you about some things. Would that be okay? I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location, a small cafe in Astoria, halfway between our neighborhoods. I was curious about what had prompted this outreach, but skeptical that it represented genuine change rather than a new strategy for reactivating my financial support. Jennifer arrived looking tired and older than her 38 years. She ordered a simple coffee and sat across from me with her hands wrapped around the cup, not meeting my eyes directly. I owe you an apology, she said finally. Several apologies, actually. I waited, saying nothing. I've been thinking about the wedding, about the way Mom talked to you, the way we all treated you. And I've been thinking about all the money you've given us over the years, all the times we called you when we were in trouble and never asked how you were doing or what you needed. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I started seeing a therapist after Christmas. My marriage is falling apart, and I thought it was because of financial stress. But Dr. Williams helped me see that it's actually because I've learned to treat relationships as transactions. I learned it from watching how our family treats you. This was not what I had expected. I realized that I don't actually know you, she continued. Like, I know you're my aunt, and I know you've always been there when we needed money, but I don't know what you like to do for fun, or what your dreams are, or even what your favorite color is. I've spent our entire relationship thinking of you as someone who exists to solve my problems, rather than as a person with your own life. I felt my carefully constructed emotional armor softening slightly. Dr. Williams asked me to make a list of all the ways I've benefited from your generosity over the years, and then to think about what I've given you in return. The first list was pages long. The second list was essentially blank. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I can't pay back all the money you've given me over the years. I don't have that kind of cash. And I know money isn't really the point anyway. But I want to start somewhere. Inside the envelope was a check for $500 and a handwritten letter. The check is partial payment toward my college loan that you covered, she said. I know it's not much, but it's what I can afford right now without creating another crisis for someone else to solve. And the letter. The letter is everything I should have said to you years ago, but was too selfish and immature to recognize. I opened the letter while she watched nervously. It was 3 pages long, written in neat handwriting, and it contained the first genuine acknowledgement I had ever received from a family member about my contributions, sacrifices, and worth as a person, rather than as a resource. She wrote about specific times when my financial help had made the difference between disaster and stability in her life, but also about her growing recognition that I had given much more than money. I had given time, attention, and emotional support that she had accepted without gratitude or reciprocation. She wrote about her regret over the wedding incident, her shame at the way the family had discussed me behind my back, her awareness that they had all participated in a form of emotional abuse by treating my generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. Most surprisingly, she wrote about her admiration for my decision to set boundaries, even though it had created hardship for family members who had become dependent on my support. I was angry at first, she had written, but now I understand that you were teaching us something important about respect and reciprocity. I hope it's not too late for me to learn that lesson. By the time I finished reading the letter, we were both crying. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, Jennifer said. I don't expect you to start giving money to people again. I just wanted you to know that at least one person in this family has started to understand how badly we've treated you, and that I'm sorry. We talked for another 2 hours. Jennifer told me about her marriage problems, her therapy sessions, her gradual recognition of patterns she had learned in childhood and carried into all her adult relationships. I told her about my pottery classes, my new apartment, my relationship with Robert. For the first time in our relationship, we had a conversation between equals rather than between a supplicant and a benefactor. As we prepared to leave, Jennifer asked hesitantly, "Would you be willing to meet for coffee again sometime? Not to talk about family drama or problems, just to get to know each other as people?" I agreed, though cautiously. One apology and one honest conversation didn't erase years of exploitation, but they represented a genuine beginning. Over the following weeks, Jennifer and I began building a different kind of relationship. We met for coffee once a week, and our conversations gradually shifted from processing past hurts to sharing current interests and experiences. She showed genuine curiosity about my pottery work and book club activities. I supported her efforts to rebuild her marriage on healthier foundations. Most importantly, money never came up. Not once did she ask for financial help or hint that she was experiencing difficulties that might require my intervention. When she mentioned legitimate challenges, job stress, marriage counseling expenses, her teenager's college planning, she talked about them as problems she was handling with her own resources, rather than crises requiring my solution. This version of Jennifer was someone I actually enjoyed spending time with. In April, Sarah graduated from high school and was accepted to several colleges with strong environmental science programs. She called to share the good news, and during our conversation, she mentioned that the family was planning a graduation party. "I really want you to be there, Grand Aunt Maggie," she said. "But I understand if you don't want to deal with family drama. I just want you to know that you're invited because I love you, not because anyone expects you to pay for anything." I had been dreading this moment, the first major family celebration since Patricia's wedding, the first test of whether I could attend family events on my own terms rather than as a service provider. After discussing it with Dr. Martinez and thinking carefully about my own emotional boundaries, I decided to attend the graduation party with specific conditions. I would bring a hostess gift but would not contribute to party expenses. I would stay for 2 hours maximum, and I would leave immediately if anyone made me feel unwelcome or taken for granted. The party was held at David's house in Whitestone, the same house where I had once overheard Linda describing me as pathetic. I arrived with a beautiful potted orchid for Sarah and a small wrapped gift, a set of art supplies for her to take to college. The dynamics were immediately different from past family gatherings. Jennifer greeted me warmly and introduced me to several people as my Aunt Margaret, who's an amazing potter. David was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with my presence, but making an effort to be civil. Patricia was coldly cordial, the kind of superficial politeness that barely conceals hostility. But the most significant difference was internal. I felt confident rather than anxious, purposeful rather than desperate for approval. I wasn't there to serve, to solve problems, or to earn my place through usefulness. I was there to celebrate Sarah's achievements as someone who loved her, and my presence was either welcome or it wasn't. But that was their choice to make rather than my responsibility to manage. Sarah was radiant throughout the party, excited about her college plans and genuinely appreciative of everyone's presence. When she opened her gifts, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for being here. It means everything to me." I stayed for exactly 2 hours, socialized pleasantly with relatives and family friends, and left when I said I would leave. Nobody asked me to help with cleanup, contribute to expenses, or solve any problems. I was simply a guest at a family celebration, nothing more and nothing less. Driving home, I felt proud of myself for navigating that social situation on my own terms. I had proven that I could maintain relationships with family members who were willing to treat me with basic respect while avoiding those who were not. That summer, Robert and I took a trip together to Vermont, staying at small bed and breakfasts and visiting art galleries and farmers markets throughout the state. It was my first vacation in over 20 years that wasn't built around visiting family members or attending family events. The trip was relaxing and sophisticated in ways I had never experienced. We explored small towns, tasted local wines, attended a pottery workshop taught by a nationally known ceramicist. Robert was an ideal traveling companion, flexible about itineraries, appreciative of local culture, and attentive without being possessive. Most importantly, he paid for his share of all expenses without discussion or keeping score. After decades of being the family member who always picked up the check, being treated as an equal financial partner felt revolutionary. On our last night in Vermont, we sat on the porch of our bed and breakfast watching fireflies dance over the inn's garden. Robert was reading a book about Vermont history, and I was working on a watercolor sketch of the mountain view, a new artistic medium I had started exploring. "This has been a perfect trip," I said, and meant it. "It has," Robert agreed, looking up from his book. "I'm grateful to have found someone who enjoys exploring new places as much as I do." Found someone. Not rescued someone or fixed someone or supported someone financially, but simply found someone whose company enriched his life. The distinction felt profound. In August, I received a letter that changed everything. The envelope was formal, thick paper with a law firm's return address in Manhattan. Inside was a notification that I had been named as the sole beneficiary of my great-aunt Catherine's estate. Aunt Catherine had been my father's sister, a woman who had never married and had worked her entire career as a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. She was 20 years older than my mother and had always lived quietly in a rent-stabilized apartment on the Upper East Side. We had exchanged Christmas cards and occasional phone calls over the years, but I hadn't realized we were particularly close. According to the lawyer's letter, Aunt Catherine had left me everything: her apartment, her savings, her stock portfolio, and her collection of antique jewelry. The total estate was valued at approximately $340,000. $340,000. More money than I had ever imagined possessing. More financial security than I had dared to dream about. But the most meaningful part of the inheritance wasn't the money. It was the letter that Aunt Catherine had left for me, to be delivered along with the legal documents. "Dear Margaret," she had written in her careful handwriting, "I've been watching you take care of everyone else for your entire adult life, and I've been waiting for you to learn to take care of yourself. I hope this inheritance gives you the freedom to live for your own happiness rather than everyone else's convenience. You deserve beautiful things, Margaret. You deserve to travel, to pursue your interests, to be generous with yourself the way you've always been generous with others. Don't let anyone guilt you into sharing this money with family members who have already taken advantage of your kindness. This is yours and yours alone. Love, Aunt Catherine." She had seen everything. This elderly woman, living quietly in her small apartment, had observed the family dynamics that I had been too close to recognize clearly. She had understood that financial independence might be the key to my emotional liberation. The inheritance process took several weeks, during which time I told no one except Robert and Dr. Martinez about Aunt Catherine's bequest. I needed time to process this windfall privately before deciding how to handle the information within my family. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the guilt that arose immediately. Was it fair for me to inherit money when other family members had children to put through college, mortgages to pay, businesses to support? Shouldn't I share this windfall with people who had real financial obligations? "Margaret," Dr. Martinez said gently, "that kind of thinking is exactly what got you into financial and emotional trouble in the first place. Your aunt specifically stated that this inheritance was meant for your personal security and happiness. Respecting her wishes means keeping this money for yourself." She was right. Aunt Catherine had lived through the Depression, had worked for 40 years in a demanding profession, had saved carefully and invested wisely specifically so that she could help me achieve financial independence. Giving that money away to family members who had already demonstrated their willingness to exploit my generosity would dishonor her intentions and perpetuate the very dynamics she had hoped to help me escape. I invested most of the inheritance in a diversified portfolio recommended by Linda Chen, my financial advisor. The returns would provide a comfortable supplement to my Social Security benefits, ensuring that I would never again face financial insecurity or feel compelled to work beyond my chosen retirement age. But I also used some of the money immediately for pure pleasure. I bought myself a car, a reliable Honda that would allow me to explore areas beyond the subway lines. I upgraded my pottery equipment and enrolled in advanced ceramics classes taught by a master potter in Manhattan. I planned a trip to Italy with Robert, a month-long exploration of Tuscan art and culture that had been a lifelong dream. Most importantly, I moved again. This time to a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Forest Hills with hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a small balcony garden where I could grow herbs and flowers. The rent was higher than anything I had ever paid before, but well within my new budget, and the apartment felt like home from the moment I walked through the door. The new apartment had space for an art studio in the converted sunroom, room for entertaining friends from my book club and pottery classes, and a sense of permanence that I had never experienced in any previous living situation. It was mine in a way that went beyond mere financial ownership. It was chosen and designed and decorated entirely according to my own preferences. In September, 6 months after receiving the inheritance, I made a decision that surprised even me. I told my family about Aunt Catherine's bequest. Not because I wanted to share the money, but because I wanted to be honest about my changed financial circumstances. I was tired of family members assuming that my decision to stop supporting them financially was based on limited resources, rather than self-respect. I arranged to meet with David, Patricia, and Jennifer together at a restaurant in neutral territory, not anyone's home, where old power dynamics might be harder to resist. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say with Dr. Martinez, had prepared myself for their likely responses. I wanted you all to know, I said over appetizers, that I recently inherited a substantial amount of money from Aunt Catherine. I'm financially secure now in ways I've never been before. The silence around the table was immediate and charged. I could see the mental calculations beginning in their faces, the hope and expectation that this windfall might mean a return to the old patterns of financial support. I also want you to know, I continued, that this inheritance doesn't change my decision about providing financial help to family members. If anything, it confirms that my boundaries were about self-respect rather than financial limitations. Patricia's reaction was immediate and predictable. So you have plenty of money, but you're still going to be selfish with it? I'm going to use it to take care of myself, yes. The way you all use your money to take care of yourselves and your families. But we have real responsibilities, David said, his voice rising slightly. Children, mortgages, and I have the responsibility to ensure my own security and happiness, I interrupted. Something I neglected for years while taking care of everyone else's responsibilities. The conversation became heated quickly, with accusations of selfishness and abandonment flowing from Patricia and David, while Jennifer remained largely silent. They seemed genuinely unable to understand why someone with financial resources wouldn't automatically make those resources available to family members who wanted them. But their anger didn't hurt the way it once had. I had learned to distinguish between legitimate criticism and manipulative pressure, between genuine family needs and manufactured crises designed to activate my guilt responses. I finished my meal calmly while they continued their protests, then stood up to leave. I love you all, I said, placing cash on the table to cover my portion of the check. But I won't be manipulated into feeling guilty for taking care of myself. If you can accept that, we can continue having family relationships. If you can't, that's your choice to make. I walked out of that restaurant feeling more powerful than I had ever felt in my life. Over the following weeks, the family's reactions varied predictably. Patricia continued her campaign of cold anger, sending occasional text messages designed to make me feel guilty for my selfishness. David tried a few more requests for financial help, framed as emergencies or investment opportunities, but gave up when I consistently declined. Jennifer, surprisingly, was supportive. I think it's amazing that you have financial security, she said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. And I think Aunt Catherine was smart to stipulate that the money was meant for your happiness rather than everyone else's problems. The real test of family relationships came at Christmas, our first major holiday since my inheritance and my declaration of financial independence. Sarah, now settled into her first semester of college, called to invite me to spend Christmas Eve with her and her parents. Just a quiet family dinner, she said. No drama, no expectations, just people who care about you spending the holiday together. I agreed with the same emotional boundaries I had established for her graduation party. I would attend as a guest rather than a service provider, would bring a hostess gift but wouldn't contribute to meal expenses, and would leave if anyone made me uncomfortable. The evening was peaceful and genuinely enjoyable. David had apparently decided that maintaining a civil relationship with me was more important than punishing me for my financial boundaries. Linda, his wife, actually seemed to respect me more now that I had demonstrated self-worth and independence. We ate a lovely dinner, exchanged modest gifts, and talked about Sarah's college experiences and everyone's holiday plans. Money was never mentioned. No one asked me to contribute to anything, and I was treated as an equal family member rather than a resource to be managed. Most significantly, I felt comfortable and confident throughout the evening. I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for demands or criticism. I was simply enjoying the company of people I cared about, people who were making an effort to treat me with respect. As I drove home through the quiet Queens streets, Christmas lights twinkling in house windows and snow beginning to fall softly, I reflected on how much my life had changed in the span of just over a year. The woman who had sat in that church hallway, humiliated and overlooked at her sister's wedding, felt like someone from another lifetime. That woman had been desperate for acceptance, willing to buy love with money she couldn't afford to give, trapped in patterns of service and sacrifice that left her emotionally and financially depleted. The woman driving home from Christmas Eve dinner was financially secure, emotionally independent, and surrounded by people who genuinely valued her company rather than her contributions. She had learned the difference between being needed and being loved, between being useful and being appreciated. But most importantly, she had learned to value herself. The following spring, Robert and I traveled to Italy for the month-long trip I had planned with my inheritance money. We spent 2 weeks in Tuscany, attending pottery workshops in small hill towns, eating incredible food at family-run restaurants, and exploring centuries-old art in churches and museums. The final week, we rented a small apartment in Rome and lived like locals, shopping at neighborhood markets, taking long walks through ancient neighborhoods, sitting in sidewalk cafes, and watching the eternal Roman theater of daily life. On our last night in Rome, we had dinner at a small restaurant near the Pantheon, a place that had been serving the same traditional Roman dishes for over a century. The walls were covered with photographs of customers from decades past, families celebrating, couples toasting anniversaries, friends sharing meals and stories. "I keep thinking about time," I said to Robert as we shared a dessert of perfectly ripe pears and aged cheese. "How much time I wasted trying to buy love from people who were never going to give it freely." "But you didn't waste that time entirely," Robert replied thoughtfully. "You learned something essential about yourself and about relationships, and you finally got to the point where you could choose differently." He was right. Those years of financial exploitation and emotional neglect had been painful, but they had also been educational. I had learned what genuine love looked like by experiencing its absence. I had discovered my own worth by recognizing how others undervalued me. "Besides," Robert continued with a smile, "if you hadn't gone through all that, you might never have ended up in pottery class, and we might never have met." True enough. The path that led me to emotional independence had also led me to unexpected love, creative satisfaction, and financial security. Sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. The waiter brought us small glasses of limoncello, compliments of the house, and we raised them in a toast to unexpected beginnings and the courage to change direction when the current path isn't working. Flying home from Italy, I looked out the airplane window at the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly below us and felt something I had never experienced before: complete satisfaction with my life choices. I was 73 years old, financially secure, emotionally independent, and surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I had hobbies that brought me joy, a comfortable home that reflected my own taste, and relationships based on mutual respect, rather than obligation or manipulation. It had taken me 7 decades to learn that I deserved to be happy, but I had finally learned the lesson. Now, almost 2 years after that humiliating moment at Patricia's wedding, I want to share something with anyone who might be listening to this story and recognizing familiar patterns in their own life. You don't have to buy love. You don't have to earn your place in relationships through constant service or financial sacrifice. You don't have to accept being treated as an inconvenience by people who claim to care about you. Love, real love, sees you as valuable simply because you exist. It doesn't require you to prove your worth through constant giving. It doesn't punish you for having needs of your own. It doesn't treat your presence as an obstruction to be managed. If the people in your life only appreciate you when you're useful to them, if they only call when they need something, if they make you feel guilty for prioritizing your own well-being, those aren't loving relationships. Those are exploitation with emotional manipulation attached. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no to requests that exceed your emotional or financial resources. You have the right to expect basic respect and appreciation for your contributions to others' lives. And most importantly, You have the right to invest in your own happiness with the same energy and resources you've been pouring into other people's problems. I'm not saying it's easy. Breaking patterns that have defined your relationships for years or decades requires enormous courage. The fear of being alone can feel worse than the pain of being exploited. The guilt of setting boundaries can seem overwhelming when you've been conditioned to believe that your value comes from your usefulness to others. But I'm here to tell you that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that respecting yourself doesn't make you selfish. The people who truly love you will adapt to your boundaries and find ways to show appreciation for your presence, rather than just your contributions. The people who don't adapt were never really in relationship with you anyway. They were just using you. My life now includes genuine friendships with people from my book club and pottery classes. People who enjoy my company without expecting me to solve their problems. It includes a romantic relationship with someone who treats me as an equal partner. It includes meaningful connections with family members who have learned to value me as a person rather than a resource. Most importantly, it includes a relationship with myself that's based on respect and care rather than criticism and neglect. I buy myself flowers because they make me happy. I take classes that interest me without needing to justify the expense to anyone. I travel to places I want to see and eat at restaurants I want to try and read books that feed my soul. I wake up each morning curious about the day ahead rather than anxious about what problems I might need to solve for other people. I go to bed each night satisfied with how I've spent my time and energy. This is what it means to live for yourself instead of through others. This is what it means to build a life based on your own values and interests, rather than other people's expectations and demands. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine, constantly giving to family members or friends who seem to take your generosity for granted? Have you ever felt like your worth was measured entirely by your usefulness to others? If this story resonates with you, I want you to know that change is possible at any stage of life. I was 72 years old when I finally learned to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being. It's never too late to choose yourself. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've experienced similar family dynamics or if you're currently struggling with the decision to set boundaries with people who have come to expect unlimited access to your resources and energy. And if this story has helped you in any way, if it's given you courage to make changes in your own life or simply helped you feel less alone in your experiences, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that might reach someone who needs to hear them. Someone who's sitting in their own metaphorical church hallway wondering if they deserve better treatment than they're receiving. You do deserve better. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships that fill you up rather than drain you dry. You deserve to invest in your own happiness with the same care and attention you've been giving to everyone else's problems. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their dependence on your sacrifice. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is to model what healthy boundaries look like. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to walk away from your assigned role in other people's lives and start writing your own story instead. Thank you for listening to mine.